Europe isn't bracing for war, it's preparing for all-out war. Sweden's drafting civilians ages 16 to 70. France is handing out nuclear survival guides. Lithuania is training citizens to resist occupation. This isn't theory, it's happening right now. Weapons stockpiling, defense budgets exploding, old alliances shifting fast. The threat? No secret, it's Russia. And if this turns into a wider war, Europe wants to be ready. So how serious is the threat? And will this new war-ready Europe be able to stop it? Let's break it down. Let's start with the threat behind it all. The panic, the stockpiles, the military spending, the survival guides. There's no need for any guesswork, as the threat in question has a flag, and it's Russia's. But here's the twist. The issue is not just about Russia being dangerous, it's about Europe being unprepared for far too long. For decades, Europe enjoyed peace, and during that peace it let its guard down. Military budgets shrank, conscription ended, deterrence out of fashion. But then 2022 happened. Russia invaded Ukraine on February 24th and brought high-intensity war back to the European continent for the first time since 1945. Since then, everything has changed. Russia now spends 40% of its federal budget on defense. That's up to 6% of the country's GDP. A full-on war economy. Tanks, missiles, tech, factories, everything is running 24/7. And in 2025, Russia is expected to outspend every European Union country together when adjusted for purchasing power. Let that sink in. The war in Ukraine isn't a local war anymore. It never truly was. If Russia succeeds in Ukraine, it won't stop there. Moldova, Poland, the Baltics, they're all watching. So is Belarus, where Russia has already stationed nuclear weapons. Yes, the threat from Russia is also nuclear, and it's already on Europe's doorstep. The worst part, Russia isn't acting alone. It's backed by Iran, supported by North Korea, closely tied to China. Authoritarian regimes are tightening their grip, militarizing fast and coordinating on every front: cyber, space, disinformation, and even migration. Meanwhile, the US, Europe's traditional safety net, is pulling back. Washington is clear, Europe needs to step up and take care of its own backyard, and let us tell you, Europe has gotten the message loud and clear. Enter the rearm Europe plan, officially known as Readiness 2030. Unofficially, some are calling it the Do Not Mess with Europe plan. The continent is done playing catch-up. Readiness 2030 is the most ambitious military push the EU has launched in decades. It's a direct response to the growing threats on its doorstep and the realization that the era of relying on American protection is coming to an end. At its core, the plan is about one thing: making Europe ready for war, financially, industrially, and strategically by 2030. Europe plans to achieve this goal by mobilizing up to $880 billion in defense investments by unlocking national public funding and mobilizing private capital, launching a powerful new tool, SAFE, the Security Action Plan for Europe, a $165 billion EU-backed loan program for urgent defense procurement, pushing joint purchases of weapons and military equipment to lower costs, ensure interoperability, and boost the continent's defense production capacity, strengthening EU-wide defense infrastructure, including satellite systems and mobility networks with dual-use capabilities, reducing dependency on non-European suppliers and buying more European, creating a stable demand pipeline for homegrown defense industries, and most importantly, building credible deterrence to prevent a future war rather than react to one. In short, it's about building a Europe that's finally serious about its own defense. But who wants the short version when so much is happening behind the scenes? So let's dive into the specifics. How exactly is Europe preparing for war? Many of the answers can be found in the White Paper for European Defense, Readiness 2030. As things stand, this isn't just another policy doc. It's more of a blueprint for how Europe plans to close its military capability gaps, boost defense spending, and get serious about long-term readiness. Let's start with the most single important factor: money, because in war, resources are everything. After years of underinvestment, Europe is finally putting its money where its mouth is. And let's be clear, the continent isn't just tossing around pocket change here. The Rearm Europe plan is one of the largest military investment plans in history, and it's worth a staggering $880 billion. But trust us, this jaw-dropping number is more than warranted. You see, defense spending across Europe has surged by over 31% since 2021, hitting $360 billion in 2024. But even with this jump, Europe's defense spending is still far below the US, Russia, and China. That's why it's time to truly go big. But where is all this money coming from? Well, the EU is using a financial loophole known as the National Escape Clause from the Stability and Growth Pact. This is a fancy way of saying, we're giving you the green light to blow past your fiscal limits when it comes to defense spending. And as a result of this green light, EU member states could increase their defense expenditures by up to 1.5% of GDP over the next 4 years. That's where the extra $880 billion meant to strengthen Europe's defense is coming from. But believe it or not, this staggering figure could be just the beginning. We also mentioned something about an extra $165 billion. You see, the EU is creating a whole new financial instrument, SAFE, to channel funds into defense. It's essentially a giant piggy bank for military investments, where the EU will provide up to $165 billion in loans to member states to buy weapons and boost their defense industries. This move will help Europe's military procurement be cheaper, faster, and more interoperable across countries. Then, there's the European Investment Bank, or EIB for short. The EIB is doubling its annual investment to $2.2 billion, focusing on high-tech defense projects like drones, cybersecurity, and quantum technologies. And the private sector isn't left out. Europe's banks and companies are being encouraged to invest heavily in defense, with tools like the Savings and Investment Union to de-risk and channel more private money into defense projects. Of course, we can't forget the major moves individual European countries are making in the defense department. Take Germany as an example. In 2022, Chancellor Olaf Scholz made headlines by committing a massive $110 billion to revamp the Bundeswehr, Germany's armed forces, following Russia's invasion of Ukraine. In 2025, Chancellor-in-Waiting Friedrich Merz outshined his predecessor in a big way. He got Germany to pass the mother of all spending bills, potentially unlocking a jaw-dropping $1 trillion for defense over the next decade. Yes, that's trillion with a T. One of the ways Germany achieved this remarkable feat was by tearing down constitutional borrowing restrictions, allowing the government to unlock an additional 1% of GDP for defense. Europe, it seems, is making one thing crystal clear: nothing, no law, no rule, is going to hold it back from protecting itself. But what is this protection exactly? Or in other words, where is all this defense money going? Well, Europe certainly isn't just piling up cash for the sake of it. As the white paper explains, the money will be used to close some serious defense gaps, because right now those gaps are wide enough to drive a tank through, and that's a problem when the geopolitical landscape is growing riskier by the day. So let's see what Europe's current defense gaps are and how all those billions can plug them. Number 1. Air and missile defense. To counter this gap, Europe needs a multi-layered air and missile defense system that can knock out cruise missiles, hypersonic threats, and anything in between. In other words, Europe needs to get really good at catching things before they even know they're being caught. Number 2. Artillery systems. Europe needs to supercharge its long-range firepower. Think big, like advanced artillery and long-range missiles capable of striking deep behind enemy lines with incredible accuracy. So when the crisis hits, Europe's artillery won't just be a deterrent, it'll be a game changer. Number 3. Ammunition and missiles. This one's simple. Europe needs a strategic stockpile, lots of ammo and missiles ready to go. After all, the last thing Europe wants is to run out mid-battle. With an initiative called Ammunition Plan 2.0, Europe aims to ensure production capacity is beefed up to keep those stocks topped off and always in motion. Number 4. Drones and counter-drone tech. The future of warfare is hovering in the sky, drones. But these unmanned systems aren't just airborne, they can also dive underwater or zip around the battlefield, all while being controlled remotely or acting on their own. And Europe needs a lot of these. However, Europe doesn't just need drones of its own, it also needs the means to take down enemy drones. It's all about building a 360-degree awareness of the battlefield and shutting down threats before they get close. Number 5. Military mobility. Ever tried moving quickly across Europe? Not easy, right? Well, imagine that, but with tanks and troops in tow. It might be time for another Mission Impossible sequel. That's why Europe is building a super efficient, EU-wide transport network for troops and equipment to move swiftly across the continent and into partner nations when needed. A turbocharged highway system, if you will. Number 6. Artificial intelligence, cyber and electronic warfare. Welcome to the next-gen battlefield. Europe is aiming to keep control over the electromagnetic spectrum, ensuring that the enemy can't jam signals or mess with any systems. On top of that, offensive cyber capabilities are a key part of the strategy. Essentially, Europe needs to be ready to counterattack if someone attempts to breach its networks. Cybersecurity is no longer just an afterthought, it's now the first line of defense. And number 7. Strategic enablers and critical infrastructure protection. To keep the whole operation running smoothly, Europe is investing in high-tech tools like air-to-air refueling aircraft, surveillance systems, and intelligence networks. These are the behind-the-scenes heroes that make everything else work, from securing space to fueling up on the go. As you can see, Europe is gearing up to defend itself in every corner, with no gaps left to exploit. The continent is building a defense that's ready for anything, anytime, anywhere. And this kind of defense can only be one thing: collective defense. With growing cooperation between its 27 member states plus Ukraine, the EU is building a united front to tackle the rising challenges in security. And this goes beyond pooling resources together. It's primarily about working together to close critical capability gaps that can no longer be ignored. For example, collaborative procurement has become essential. By joining forces to buy critical defense items like ammunition, missiles, and drones, countries can reduce costs, streamline production, and ensure interoperability between forces. This strategy will also go a long way to ensuring the European defense industry is capable of scaling up production to meet growing demand for military equipment and technologies. You see, the EU defense market has historically been too dispersed, with many national players focused primarily on domestic markets. This, of course, hinders the ability to scale up and meet the needs of the continent's armed forces. In response, the EU has initiated a comprehensive strategy to unite its defense industry, emphasizing the need to increase investment in European manufacturing and to reduce dependencies on non-EU suppliers. By 2026, the revision of the EU Directive on Defense Procurement is expected to introduce a European Preference Clause, ensuring that procurement policies are geared toward boosting the local defense industrial base. But can Europe's existing defense infrastructure support this? Absolutely. Defense companies across the continent can ramp up existing production lines and create new ones to handle the significant surge in demand for defense equipment. A prime example of this effort is the investment by the British BAE Systems, which has committed $2.5 billion to scale up production capacity for its armored vehicles, including the Combat Vehicle 90, or CV90 for short. Similarly, Rheinmetall from Germany is aggressively expanding its artillery shells production, with plans to hit 1.1 million shells per year by 2027. This rapid production expansion is happening across multiple sites, including in Hungary and Ukraine, where the company is already producing main battle tanks. This surge in production reflects the broader European strategy of not only increasing production volume, but also diversifying supply sources within the EU to reduce vulnerabilities in defense supply chains. Thales, a major player from France, has been focusing on reducing Europe's dependence on the US for space-based intelligence. With only 49 military satellites from European NATO members compared to the US's 246, the gap is significant. Thales is playing a key role in closing this gap, as space-based systems are increasingly vital for defense operations, providing intelligence, surveillance, and communications capabilities. Then there's Leonardo in Italy, Saab in Sweden, Airbus, and the list could go on and on. Each of these companies is stepping up to meet the Russian threat head-on, and they're joining forces too. They're sharing expertise, resources, and technology to ramp up production at an unprecedented rate, creating a united military-industrial complex, one that can compete with the best in the world. This pooling of defense resources brings us to a crucial question. Are we on the verge of a unified European army? After all, a single cohesive military force would enable faster decision-making, better coordination, and a stronger, more unified response to Russia. Unfortunately, we won't be seeing a European army anytime soon. The concept dates back to 1950, when France proposed a European defense community, aiming for a unified force with shared resources. This idea came close to fruition in the early 1950s, but fell apart when France refused to ratify the treaty in 1954. Over time, NATO became the primary European defense mechanism, with each country retaining control over its military. Today, the creation of a unified European army is politically impossible. Every EU member has its own military traditions and deep-rooted national pride, making the idea of a single, unified force highly unlikely. Moreover, the sheer cost of consolidating and standardizing military assets, like procurement and training, would be astronomical. Instead, a more realistic approach lies in enhancing cooperation. The EU is focusing on shared strategic assets like transport fleets and satellite intelligence. In other words, countries can share resources without dismantling national forces. So while a European army remains a distant dream, these pragmatic steps, like creating a single defense market and improving interoperability between forces, are the way forward if Europe is to stand united in the face of the Russian threat. But will Europe have enough soldiers to counter this threat? That's another major question. Well, the continent is certainly working on it. According to various estimates, Europe needs roughly 300,000 soldiers to effectively deter Russia, especially if it's forced to operate without relying heavily on the US. As a reminder, the US currently has about 100,000 troops stationed in Europe, although that number could soon shrink. Recent reports suggest the Pentagon is considering a proposal to withdraw up to 10,000 troops from Eastern Europe, which could shift more of the burden onto European forces. That's why the 300,000 figure is being treated as the new benchmark, a target Europe may have to hit on its own. It's also the figure the Kiel Institute, a renowned German think tank, suggests when discussing how Europe could spend the $880 billion for defense. The think tank calls for mobilizing 300,000 additional troops and organizing them into 50 fast-deployable brigades. Now, the idea of Europe mustering 300,000 soldiers to counter Russia's threat is certainly a daunting task, but it's not entirely out of reach. Sure, Europe's military manpower has been significantly downsized since the end of the Cold War, with some countries like France ending conscription and reducing force sizes by as much as 40%. However, there's a silver lining. The EU does have a massive population of roughly 450 million people, which is significantly larger than Russia's 144 million. This gives the continent the potential to generate the necessary manpower if the political will is there. Poland is one country already stepping up to the challenge. Despite already having the EU's largest army with 216,000 troops, Warsaw is pumping billions into expanding its forces. The ultimate goal, 500,000 troops. However, the first milestone is training 100,000 people by 2026. Given that Poland is already spending 4.7% of its GDP on defense, the highest in NATO by GDP share, there's no doubt that the country will pull off this expansion successfully. Okay, let's see where we are on Europe's preparing for war checklist. The continent has taken care of funding, weapons, troops, training and readiness, logistics, intelligence, and cybersecurity. Is that it? Is the checklist completed? Well, not quite. We still have to address infrastructure, specifically physical defense infrastructure. You see, Russia shares a land border with quite a few European countries. In the event of an all-out war, this would allow Moscow to strike quickly and directly. The countries that would be in immediate danger include Finland, with an 800-mile land border, Latvia, with a 240-mile border, Lithuania, with a 165-mile border, Poland, with a 124-mile border, Norway, with a 122-mile border, and Estonia, with a 183-mile border. With these long borders in mind, it shouldn't be surprising that most countries on this list are already making moves to protect their borders, and once again, Poland is leading the way. The country's East Shield program aims to fortify its eastern border, and it's quickly becoming the centerpiece of Poland's defensive strategy. With a hefty budget of over $2.5 billion, this ambitious plan is designed to turn the country's eastern flank into a fortress. As Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk put it during a recent exercise, all these billions spent and systems put in place are there for one purpose, so that no adversary dares to attack us. By adversary, Tusk of course means Russia. The program's primary focus is on creating a multi-layered defense system that impedes the Russian forces, while enabling rapid mobility for Polish troops. Expect to see a blend of traditional fortifications like bunkers and strongpoints, alongside cutting-edge technology such as anti-drone systems, high-tech surveillance, and advanced communications networks. The Baltic states are also not sitting idly by. After all, the capitals of some of the three Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, are located not even 60 miles away from the border with Russia and Belarus. With this proximity and limited defensive depth in mind, these states have been ramping up their own defense efforts in preparation for any potential conflict. Estonia, for example, has been busy constructing over 600 bunkers, fighting positions, and dragon teeth-style obstacles along its border with Russia. Latvia and Lithuania are similarly bolstering their defenses, working with Poland and other NATO members to create a unified, multi-layered defense system. However, the main idea behind these defensive measures is not necessarily to stop an attack immediately, but to at least shape it. This would allow the defending nations to hold off enemy forces long enough for NATO reinforcements to arrive and counterattack. This leaves just one item on Europe's Readiness 2030 checklist: nuclear warfare. As you probably know, Russia has the largest stockpile of nuclear weapons in the world, with 5,580. And it's no secret that the country's president Vladimir Putin has repeatedly invoked the potential use of these weapons in his rhetoric, especially when discussing NATO's involvement in European security. So how can Europe prepare for such a massive threat? Well, Europe's path to nuclear protection, for the most part, lies in its relationship with the US. Namely, the US has approximately 100 B-61 gravity bombs deployed across 6 bases in 5 European countries: Italy, Germany, Belgium, the United States, and Turkey. These bombs are part of NATO's nuclear sharing agreement, meaning the US provides these weapons for potential use by its NATO allies. However, what if the US were to withhold its consent to use these bombs? That leaves Europe searching for alternative sources of nuclear deterrence. In Europe, the only 2 sources of this deterrence could be France and the UK. The UK maintains a fixed number of nuclear warheads, 225, with 120 operationally available on 48 submarine-launched ballistic missiles on its Vanguard-class Trident submarines. France, on the other hand, has approximately 290 warheads. However, more importantly, France's nuclear arsenal is completely independent. The country designs, produces, and controls its own nuclear weapons. In contrast, the UK works closely with the US in nuclear development. This independence has allowed France to already look for ways to expand its nuclear umbrella, offering protection to more European countries. Essentially, this means France would use its own nuclear deterrent to protect Europe in the event of an attack. Poland has already expressed openness to this idea, considering it as an important step in securing its own defense. And while European nations remain outmatched by Russia's vast arsenal, it's reassuring to know that they're not defenseless in this critical area. And there you have it. From filling up its war chest to building fortifications, Europe is clearly taking decisive steps to protect itself in a rapidly changing security landscape. But with Russia's vast military might, a question lingers. Are these measures enough to ensure long-term peace? And if an all-out war is about to break out, when do you see this happening? Do you agree with the recent German intelligence assessments that suggests Europe may have until 2029 at the latest to prepare? Share your thoughts in the comment section below.